Alors, bonjour tout le monde. J'ai le grand privilège d'avoir avec moi Mike Dillinger, qui est un spécialiste, un scientifique spécialisé dans la cognition et un interprète chevronné. Et on a eu un petit problème technique. Malheureusement, j'ai découvert que j'avais pas la bonne version de Zoom pour pouvoir me raccorder au service d'interprétation simultanée de Lucie. Alors, Lucie est avec nous. Elle enregistre son interprétation. Elle va la faire de son côté. Et je vais faire un petit montage après, aujourd'hui ou demain dans laquelle je vais inclure l'interprétation en français que Lucie va faire pour nous. Désolée pour les francophones, mais ce n'est que partie remise. Alors, let me introduce you, Mike Dillinger, our famous cognitive scientist and an interpreter who has accepted to talk about a brand new opportunity for translators, as for and what I think. Mike will explain us that. That is to say, the knowledge graphs. Knowledge graphs, it's difficult for us to understand what it is, but with your explanation, Mike, and I think it will be easier for us. But let's start talking about if you want to. I would like to speak about the situation, the issues for translators nowadays, and our superpowers, and then we switch to knowledge graphs, because translators are very worried for their jobs, and they have weaknesses. For instance, Mamango, you will talk about Mamango, and they have strength and they have opportunities, and one of these opportunities is knowledge graphs. Could you tell us something about, first of all, introduce yourself to us, because you have quite a wonderful profile.
Thank you. So yes, what can I say? I was a researcher in cognitive science, and I do have experience as a translator and interpreter. In fact, the topic of my PhD was how interpreters think during simultaneous translation. So this is a field that's very close to my heart, and it's a real pleasure to hear you speak in French again after so many years. I've been away from Quebec far too long. What shall we talk about first? So I went, let me think.
You have made your PhD with Frederickson in McGill University.
At McGill,
and
that's
then,
correct.
McGill, and then you disappear from my life because
that's right.
You
because
were
I went to yes, yeah. I went to teach as a professor of linguistics in Brazil for many years.
Okay.
And then I came back from there to work in machine translation for a couple of decades. And from machine translation, building machine translation systems and helping companies use them or deploy them. And from there, I got involved in this newer field of knowledge graphs and structured knowledge that we can leverage in AI. So I built a team to do that at LinkedIn, and we made really quite significant progress there. And then I moved on. So now I'm doing other things.
Okay, so that's interesting. You looked at the weaknesses of translators on the translation market nowadays. We were talking about Mamango. Mamango, it's an acronym that replace French. That's what you said. Could you explain that? Okay, could you explain?
Sure. This is great. So what you're referring to is the content of a keynote presentation I gave a couple of weeks ago in Budapest, Hungary, as part of the MemoQ Fest. So MemoQ is a translator tool, of course, that you know about.
Yes.
And I went to talk about address the elephant in the room, in fact, that language service professionals in general are very, very worried for their jobs because from what we hear, they're going to be phased out pretty soon. So I did what's called a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, but I did it in a slightly different order. So the threats that I mentioned were from Mamango. Mamango is an acronym that I invented to refer to the very large tech companies, right? So Meta, Amazon,
Microsoft, Apple, NVIDIA, Google. Okay.
Okay, and OpenAI. So what happens is they have a huge budget and they have what I call very big megaphones. So whatever they say gets amplified enormously. And if you don't pay very careful attention, it sounds like their version of what's going on, which is to help them grow, is the only version of things.
Yes.
Okay, and that's my only point, is that what they say is not the only thing that's happening, and it's not always the most important thing that's happening. Right? So for the use cases, the ways in which these huge trillion-dollar companies use language, then automation is a must. Okay? And the quantity of content is far more important than the quality of the content. Okay? But that's only one use case. There are many, many others. So if we listen to these Mamango companies, it sounds like the end of the world is coming. We don't need language professionals. We don't need translators. But I argue that that's just not true. It's true for particular use cases. Okay? We don't want humans to sit down and translate search queries for Google or throw away email messages. There's one, it's impossible because there are too many of them. Two, it would be horrendously boring. You may remember the Meteo system for weather reports in Canada. So that was one of the first machine translation systems. My way of thinking is that it was successful because it would kill the human translators to have to translate these boring reports every day. Okay, so that's a very specific use case that doesn't reflect the whole market of translation and content creation. That's the only point that I wanted to make about Mamango. There are other things happening. We
don't hear that much about those other things. That's the problem here. Okay.
That's right. That's because these big companies have such a huge budget that their shouting drowns out all the other things that are going on. So that's the only point I want to make. So when we hear what they say in these huge companies, we want to take it with a grain of salt because they're talking about what's interesting for them.
I have a question about that because from the point of view of translators, not interpreters, but translators, we have to translation agencies. They buy all those. I think they buy that that way of thinking. And so they buy all those cat tools that that were developed by that's the problem, and that's very difficult for translators to work in those conditions because it's not made for translators. Those tools are not made for translators, but for translation agencies and benefits. No?
I'm not sure I agree with that. So many of the tools
that we're discussing.
Made for translators to be able to work more efficiently.
Yes, part of it. Yes, I agree.
So the tools are to help us free up energy and effort from the
Mhm.
routine parts of the job to be able to focus on creativity.
Okay, you were talking about MimeQ. Okay, may I?
Yes.
Okay,
No, just
because
one more thing here. But I think you're right. Sometimes the translation agencies use the tools for different things, right? For
yes,
creating a difference between the cost and the price that they sell for. Okay, that's a different
no,
story.
okay, I'm talking about MimeQ because I've worked with MimeQ. I've been working with MimeQ for 4 or 5 years, and we have a lot of problem with the QA function, quality assurance, and antidote. Here in maybe it's peculiar here in Quebec. We have to use antidote. You have heard about antidote, a corrector. Okay, it's like a Grammarly. You know, maybe Grammarly.
Okay. Yes,
Okay,
of course.
but it's the French equivalent,
Yep.
and it's very difficult at the end. Okay, when you're tired and you use the QA and then antidote, it's just like in English using Grammarly and then the QA and go back to Grammarly because the QA made some mistakes. And when I make my PhD, my doctorate thesis, I come to realize that at the end of translation, you have to work with your right hemisphere, not
not only the left.
The left one. Most at the end, you work mostly with the left, the right hemisphere, creativity hemisphere. But when you have to go from QA to Grammarly or antidote, you're in the other hemisphere, so it doesn't work, and you introduce mistakes because you're too tired, and those. We have problems as translators to have this function antidote or Grammarly used by phrase and name sort. They don't want to have it. MemoQ use antidote, but we have still the QA. Trados use antidote, but you have still the QA. So that's why I say I don't understand if it's for translators, why do those CAT tools are not adapted to the translator at that point.
So,
but that's not your expertise. I'm just
actually, I've had the pleasure of talking to the developers of many of these tools.
Oh,
okay.
Could you introduce them to me?
Yes, okay. I can actually. So when I worked with machine translation, one of the things that I worked a lot on was helping translation memory tools integrate with machine translation. So my team at a startup built the first system that had that. No one used it, it died, but it became the standard for translation memories afterwards. So yeah, building tools is a very difficult job to do.
The problem
the tools that we have are not there. There are many problems. You're talking about one of them. So
yes,
as a matter of fact, you're right, because we don't have tools that are focused as much on the translators' problems as they are on management problems.
That's it. That's the point I wanted to tell. Yes,
so
because no, that's normal.
There are many things that we could do, but it's difficult to get the financing and the justification from the market in sales to be able to actually implement them.
We are on the same page, Mike. Okay,
oh, yes.
That's okay.
I think we are.
Great.
Okay.
So let's talk about, so we're talking about threats, and there is another threats. We have talked about Mamango, and then
so we were talking about threats and thinking about the threats as maybe they're not as relevant as they sound. Or maybe they're not as overwhelming as they sound.
Okay, and we are weaknesses, fragmented organization, yes, delivery speed and coverage.
Right, so we do not, as translators and language professionals, we don't have a $1 trillion organization to support us. We don't.
That's it.
We don't have well-funded groups promoting our work, educating people about how important it is, supporting development of the tool that you just described. We don't. So this is a weakness of our profession. Okay, we don't have huge unions like the auto workers union that does this kind of thing. So this is one of our weaknesses.
Okay, but
okay, that's the only thing I wanted to say. That
we have
some
superpowers.
weaknesses, but we also have superpowers. Okay. So one of the things that I see as strengths, well, no, let's back up. We can describe and develop our strengths by comparing them to others. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, for example, and natural language processing, the vast majority of the workers in the field are trained in engineering. But if you look at what courses they have to take to become software engineers, then you'll notice something very peculiar. There's absolutely nothing about language. The most they get are these artificial programming languages, which are nowhere near as complex and sophisticated as human languages. And that's all the training they have. So
we are still on the same page. Yes, that's what I knew.
So
that's
when their opinions, when they are managing and in charge and organizing things, then of course, naturally, they'll use the things they know to work with new problems like language. Okay? But there are many problems, there are many subtleties and challenges in language that they don't, my opinion is, they do not understand at all. Okay, and that's why I'm talking about language, superpowers of language professionals, because we understand in far more depth, because we're trained and we have lots of experience working only with text. Okay, whereas the engineers have to take this strange phenomenon and kind of force it into numbers. Okay, whereas we're very comfortable dealing with the vagaries and the intricacies and the subtlety of language. So we have skills or superpowers that I don't think they can even aspire to.
I think so too.
Right? So so I think this is room for hope that when it becomes clearer how important these additional skills are, then there'll be more work and more interesting work for language professionals. Okay, what I like to point out is for engineers, language is called unstructured data, which means it's just random stuff kind of stuffed together, right? That reflects, to my way of thinking, that reflects that they don't know how to understand what's going on with language. Okay. And when you look carefully at how they talk about language, for example, in LLMs, they talk about tokens. Okay?
Yes.
Cool. Tokens, that's it. Do they talk about kinds of tokens? No. Do they talk about different kinds of relations between tokens? No. Do they talk about the meaning of tokens? No. They have a very simple engineering view of what we look at in a very, very different way.
Should we talk about statistics? Should we say tokens and statistics for engineers?
There you go. There you go. So they can, these are the things that the engineers know about. Statistics, mathematical modeling, they're very, very, very good at these things. They've developed ever more sophisticated mathematical models. But math is useful to the extent that we know what to count. Okay, so if we only think that there is one kind of object out there, like a token, and we only count tokens, then the mathematical model will not be very interesting or sophisticated. But if we know that there are many different kinds of tokens and many different kinds of relations between the tokens, then we can produce, with the same exact tools, a much more sophisticated mathematical model of language.
Mhm.
Okay, but for that we
Okay.
need the language professionals' insight and understanding of all of the different linguistic phenomena. So
Will it
statistics
be
on their own are not bad, but
no?
statistics used with a
Yeah.
poor model of language won't tell us very much.
Okay. And are they open to the idea that language professionals like us will collaborate with them? Or
Only when they get into
or
trouble.
yeah. And do they get often into trouble so they can
Yes. So you see all
okay.
the press about hallucinations, and the reason they have
Yes.
hallucinations is because the model of language that they use is so impoverished.
Okay.
Okay, that's why they have. Now, when a group is tasked with fixing hallucinations, then all of a sudden they become much more interested in the skills of people who understand language in more depth.
Hey. Okay. There's
So this
hope.
is one of the
There's
reasons
hope.
this is what I'm trying to say. So
Yeah.
as people become more aware that things are not as easy as they seem, then there will be an increase in demand for our skills as linguists. So this is actually what happened to me at LinkedIn. At LinkedIn, they were having some of the key technologies there are search and recommendations. And it's at one point, the engineers were kind of stuck. They kept getting all these strange recommendations and strange search results. So someone tapped me and said, "Can you help us here? Let's see help us see what's going on." Okay, and I brought my skills as a linguist to help organize the resources that the engineers used to improve their outputs. And we established a really fruitful and systematic working relationship. They knew their stuff, I knew my stuff. I had to develop special skills for translating into engineeringese, and then go back to my team and speak as a linguist. But it was a very productive collaboration. Okay.
Okay.
And we could see and measure the impact of that collaboration very easily.
Hmm.
So this is what I think is going to happen as the problems become more visible from using just an engineering approach. I think we will need more and more other sophisticated skills of language professionals.
Okay.
So those are the
That's
superpowers
interesting.
I'm talking about. And this is why I
Okay.
think that the threats may not be such horrendous threats. They're just overblown and louder than usual.
We start to see in Quebec translation schools and programs shut down. Shut. Okay, shut.
Yes,
That's we are quite worried about that, and
of course.
less young people want to start studies in translation because they
Yes.
are wondering. They are young. They don't have that experience and that point of view you are talking right now. So, what can we do if
So
there's
I see
no
the same thing.
more?
I track the same thing for linguistics departments and enrollment in linguistics. What here in the US they call analytic linguistics. Is declining, and there are departments that are closing or being threatened with closure because there's less demand from students for this, less interest. This is, again, part of the big megaphones that the big companies have, right?
Mhm.
There's so much talk about other use cases that people aren't as aware as the challenges, the interest, the joy of working with language.
Mhm.
So this again comes back to one of our weaknesses as language professionals is we don't have the organizations in place to help promote and inform and educate people about what we do and why it's important.
Okay.
So the
Okay.
result of that is nobody knows why it's important, so we close them.
Mhm.
This
That's
is
it.
very unfortunate, but I'm fairly certain that when other approaches get us into deep trouble, then we'll have to start opening translation programs again and hiring
I think so too.
training and hiring linguists. Okay.
Okay. And what about the opportunity you wrote in your presentation, text as a pivot for multimodal modal models?
Yeah, that's hard to say, isn't it?
And
Yes.
text as interface for LLM too.
Yeah.
That's what you were talking about.
Yes. So the way I was presenting it is that I think the next wave or phases of artificial intelligence will be very, very much focused on text and language.
Oh.
So we've done a great deal of very good work thinking about the world in terms of numbers. Okay, this is very compatible with the engineers' training. This is perfect. And now we're starting to see that, well, computer programming was built to deal with numeric problems and not with textual problems. So the way we approach textual problems in computer science is a kludge, is an ad hoc sort of, let's see if this works kind of thing. And what we're seeing now is that the next generation of AI and computer science, I think, will be almost entirely focused on language and cognition. Okay? Rather than frequencies of tokens, for example.
Okay, so
one way of thinking about this then is that we use text in a range of different ways. So text is more than a sequence of tokens. You know that, I know that, but many engineers do not. Okay, so one way to say is, okay, right now we use text as a kind of steering wheel when we do prompt engineering, as it's called. Okay, so this is text as a steering wheel. The more you understand about text and sentences and how they vary and what makes them clear and what makes them confusing, the better you will do in your prompt engineering. So language is very important for that. You mentioned text as a pivot. So newer AI systems are linking different kinds of data, right? So we're linking text, written tokens, speech, music, images, video. These are all different modalities of data, okay? But current models use text as the pivot. So everything gets attached to text, and text is the fulcrum or the touchstone that everything depends on. But we're still looking at text now as tokens, not as something more sophisticated. Right? So that means that these models of multimodal relationships are not going to do well when we ask them to do more complicated things. We need more skills. We need people with more deeper understanding of text to make these multimodal models work better. So these are some of the kinds of things that I think are coming in AI, for example, and in technology in general, that will require more sophisticated linguistic skills. You also mentioned text as interface, right? So right now, LLMs do a very good job of generating sentences, way better than I've been tracking this for decades. So this is seems almost miraculous that they can do such a good job of generating sentences. What's coming next for that? How can we guarantee that the sentences are appealing or engaging or culturally appropriate or not offensive? We haven't gotten there yet. And why is that? Because we need more participation from people with significant training and experience in language. You see what I'm saying here? So text has many, many functions beyond just being a sequence of tokens. But I think that the engineers haven't quite caught on to that yet.
Okay.
And
that's correct. And one of these skills is knowledge graph.
So
Is that
this
the
is
skill
one
of the or
you
the result of the result of these skills? Professional
not, perhaps not a result, but the knowledge graphs are not a new technology, but they're coming back. They're gaining much more interest. They're gaining much more interest because they seem to be working well to overcome the limitations of this view that language is a sequence of tokens. So what people are interested in knowledge graphs today to fix LLMs.
Okay.
Okay, so
that's okay.
if you look
Yes.
at text or written documents, for example, as a kind of storage for knowledge, and if we can make the knowledge easier for the computer to process, then we'll be able to do more. Okay, we'll be able to help control the LLMs and make them say more reasonable things and say fewer crazy things. And this is where the interest in knowledge graphs is coming from. So knowledge graphs are a way to, we kind of translate sentences into knowledge graphs. It's a way to make facts more easily processable by computers. It's basically it. So a knowledge graph is a collection of facts. And the facts are in a really simple syntax. Okay. And some of the key characteristics are that the knowledge graphs don't rely on terms, they rely on concepts. So if you have 100 different ways of saying software engineer, LinkedIn, we found more than 100 ways of saying software engineer, then in a knowledge graph, you will get around this variation, document it separately, and say, we have this concept here of software engineer, and let's store that, and let's describe it, and what I call unpack it. What does it mean to be a software engineer? What are the parts? What are the components and characteristics? Okay, so we work at this much less variable level of concepts to make it easier for algorithms and computers and AIs to digest this information. Okay. But we're talking here about a translation between very variable and very complex linguistic inputs and very simplified knowledge graphs. So guess what? Who's going to be able to make this mapping or translation? You need language skills. We have no, not human beings. We need people who have significant training and experience in language to be able to do this efficiently. Okay, so if we work in this direction, then we'll be able to accumulate not just text, but knowledge. Okay.
I thought it was done, that we were already accumulating knowledge. So it's not really.
That's an excellent point. So we are accumulating, if you go to the library, that's a wonderful accumulation of human knowledge. But computers have a really difficult time digesting and using that. So now what we're talking about is translating this human accessible knowledge. Even humans have problems, right? If I give you legal texts or texts in fine chemistry or something like that, then at least I don't understand any of it because I don't have the tools to translate the words into concepts. Okay, and computers are like that for any kind of text. So it's very difficult. The rise of knowledge graphs is to take this knowledge that we do have available and try to make it more available to computers so that they can compare things not just in terms of spelling, but in terms of meaning.
And languages,
okay.
Yes, right. But there is a problem with LLM. They cover several languages in the words only. French, English,
about 17,
German.
yes, the major languages, right.
And with knowledge graphs, can we cover many more languages?
We can do it much more efficiently. So if we have concepts then translators can go in and say, oh, I know what this concept is in my language. It's this.
Okay.
Okay. And we separate out the work of accumulating knowledge from the work of documenting how it might be said, instead of conflating them, which is what LLMs do. They say, oh, this is knowledge. I look at it and I see knowledge, but it's just strings, just sequences of characters for the computer. Right? So we're trying to take things to the, with knowledge graphs, we try to take things to the next step.
Okay, and what about in your thesis, you work with frame, schema, and things, various structures of knowledge in your thesis.
That's right.
What about knowledge graphs? Is there a kind of graph?
It's the same thing.
Frame. Okay.
It's just a new term for the same things.
Okay.
Okay, so we're talking here about structured knowledge. Years ago, we talked about frames and schemas and semantic networks. The vocabulary has changed, and interest in it has decreased and now increased again with new names.
Yes, okay.
Okay, so these are all, for example, we're very familiar with taxonomies. Many people develop taxonomies and use taxonomies. They're a kind of structured knowledge. Unfortunately, they're very limited kinds of knowledge. They only document a couple of kinds of relations between entities. So knowledge graphs are broader. They include taxonomies, they include ontologies, and they include other kinds of information as well. Okay, so you ingest, you can use a taxonomy as part, as the skeleton, as I like to say, of a knowledge graph. It's not the whole thing, but it's an important part. Okay,
terminology. You have worked with Marie-Claude Lhomme from
yeah, so terminology is a very interesting case here. Terminologists are language professionals like us who have very important and specific skills. But I think terminologists have a problem of describing why and how they're important. Okay? It's difficult to sell terminology services to a company because, like, why do we need that? We don't. It's difficult to convince people of it. But I think terminologists have really important skills for knowledge graphs, for example. They're very good at delimiting a concept and describing a concept. They're not used to describing it for computers. They describe it and define concepts for humans. But with a little bit of training, we can fix that and say, here, take your description of this concept and let's put it in a format that the computer can leverage. Wonderful. So I think terminologists will probably play an important role in building knowledge graphs. Okay. It's a new use of their skills, redirected in a slightly different direction, I would say. Translators, for the same reason you just said, the LLMs these days only cover a handful of languages. And when you look at the research on multilingual LLMs, it's just that there's not enough data and there's not a clear enough understanding about how to map tokens in one language to tokens in another language. Who can tell us about that? Not engineers. Right?
Neither do I. I'm not an engineer, but I would not be able to answer that question because you have two tokens, for instance, in French and English, or two concepts. How can you match them? Or
that's
in
right.
English,
so
in French, in numbers?
Problem. Yes. So even things like ne pas and not. So you have two chunks that map to one chunk. So that's an easy case. But you have things like balle, bille, ballon. You have different balls of different sizes in French, but not in English. That's a real problem for LLMs. They don't know how to map. And you have
phrasal
verbs. Phrasal verbs in English are horrendous for absolutely everyone. But you have things like, masculine and feminine forms of doctor and
Yes.
teacher. And
Yes.
these are issues as well. So sometimes LLMs will just change them into randomly. And you have tu and vous in English, in French, and in other languages, you have similar distinctions.
Yes.
But LLMs don't know why the distinction is there and how they should map it to this you in English.
Okay.
Okay. So there are many things there that there's a lack of knowledge for more sophisticated modeling of language. And I think that's what's blocking further progress.
Okay. And could you explain us the concept of knowledge graph? You have published 4 articles on your Lincoln site, the page on knowledge graph. When you want to start a knowledge graph from scratch, could you explain us a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So I have a blog. I try to produce something every week about knowledge graphs, LLMs, and related topics. It's on my profile on LinkedIn. And what we're referring to is a group of 3 articles where I said, okay, if you want to start building a knowledge graph, where would you start? Many people think that knowledge graphs have to be like Google's knowledge graph, with millions and billions of entities and these kinds of things. Again, this goes back to Mamango and the big megaphone. We only hear about it from them because of their use case. But normal companies and normal projects don't need a million concepts. So the first step and the first article is to say, okay, what are the important concepts that we need to pay attention to for this task or for this company? And what I described there is a very quick and dirty method of saying, okay, well, in our documentation, and which are the things that are most frequently talked about? So we know which ones to focus on. And that means instead of having millions to focus on, we might have a few hundred or 1,000. That makes it more tractable, more possible to do manually even. Okay, we can use tools to identify what are the kinds of things that we usually want to talk about. What we get in a list like that, a list of the most common nouns, for example, are the entities that we're most interested in a given project or company. And we find there's synonyms, because we learn in school from our writing teachers that we're supposed to use synonyms. That makes life horrendous for computers and a little bit better for us to read, but it's something we have to get over when we process these things. So what I'm talking about as a method here is identify the key nouns, the ones that are most important for what you're doing, and their synonyms. And maybe some alternative forms. There are often abbreviations or slang terms that creep in, or these kinds of things, or other language terms, or whatever. But in so doing, we identify the key concepts. Okay, and that's a really important step. So our project or company or task focuses on these concepts. So that's one step. Another step is to see, well, what characteristics or relationships are most important to us for our project. You don't want to describe the whole world. Okay, if you have a company that produces automotive engines, we don't have to have information about octopi, and wombats or things like that. Right? Google sometimes feels like it has to have everything, but in real life, for most projects, this is not the case. Okay, so then we need to know for each of our entities, what are the characteristics, not all of the characteristics, but which of the characteristics and relationships are important for us to document our understanding of this domain for our purposes. So that means we don't need to write down or document or put in form of a knowledge graph everything, only the things that are important for our purposes. Okay, and that allows us to build 2 kinds of facts. One kind of fact is a relation, so it's a relation between things. A dog is a mammal, okay? But also descriptive fact, like a dog has 4 legs. Already here, by identifying the key concepts and key relations, we have a kind of simplified language for describing those facts, for building those facts, I would say. Okay? And the key here then is to identify synonyms so that we have the smallest knowledge graph language that will cover all of the things that we're interested in. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, it does. And you were talking about dogs, and in my thesis, I had the part of, quality of those relationships we can use in a knowledge graph.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
Right.
So you can say legs are part of dog or part
I hope
of,
so. Yes, part of mammals.
Yes, I hope so too.
Right?
Of mammals
okay.
and so on and so on. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So the kinds of things that we talk about are generally individuals and categories, right? So we can talk about Fido. This is one specific dog with a bunch of specific characteristics. Or we can talk about dogs, okay, which generally have these characteristics, but there's some variation. So they're kind of different sorts of definitions. If we use the word dog or pooch or chien or hund or cachorro, it doesn't matter. It's still the same concept. Right? So what we're doing is kind of separating out all of this linguistic variation from what's behind it and documenting meaning. LLMs don't do any of this. LLMs don't do any of this. This is why I'm saying this is probably going to be next, so we can get over the problems of working with language in the absence of meaning.
If I understand, knowledge graphs can help LLM to give a better result, better translation,
Yes.
avoid hallucinations with knowledge graphs.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, knowledge graphs add meaning to the LLM's focus on syntax.
Okay.
Okay, so it's a richer, more sophisticated view of language.
Okay, you remember I asked you if you could answer this question, the following question: can knowledge graphs help generating translation of quality? Yes.
Sure.
With
so if
LLM. I
if
should
you're using LLMs,
with LLM.
yes,
LLMs
if you're using
with
LLMs,
knowledge
then
graphs.
yes, right. So then the LLM can give you a probable sequence of tokens, but the knowledge graph can tell you whether that sequence of tokens makes sense.
Okay. And the other question I ask you, can knowledge graphs give job to translators? The answer is yes, because they can help to make those knowledge graphs. Okay. That could be a part of could be part of the job of translators to work on knowledge graphs.
It could.
Okay.
And there are a range of ways of doing it. I mean, one of the things we haven't talked about is perspective. So if we talk about the knowledge of a dog, about dogs, for example, the common characteristics of dogs are likely to be different in different places, or to speakers of different languages. Okay, in Brazil, for example, where people don't usually have dogs as pets.
No.
Dogs are street dogs, wild, aggressive, hungry, pretty ugly looking mutts. Okay, that's a very different concept of dog from what you would get in California, for example, where people commonly have them as pets, spend money taking care of them. Many of them look just beautiful. Okay, so when we go in this direction, we'll be able to start documenting different perspectives on things. The example I like to use is rice. Okay, so the concept of rice for a farmer is something that has roots and a stem and leaves and seeds, okay, and reacts well to a certain amount of water, okay, and is measured in acres. If you ask a farmer how much rice do you have, he won't say 2 cups. He'll say 100 acres. So that's a very clear concept of rice. But if you ask the same thing of someone who's cooking, then the rice does not have leaves, I hope not, and does not have roots and does not have a stem, okay, and in fact doesn't have, it's been processed so it doesn't have the covering or the germ, okay, and it's been dried. But if you ask a cook how much rice do you have, and they say, oh, I have a 5-kilo bag here. But both use the term rice for very different concepts. So one of the things that translators are going to have to help us with is tying down how the same concept can be very different in different places to avoid misunderstanding, right? So if you translate rice as riz, but you know the reader is a farmer, then you might use a different translation, right? If you know this, if you know it's a nutritionist, you might use it quite a different, because for a nutritionist, rice is a source of, vitamin A or whatever it is. But for farmers don't know anything about what kind of vitamins are in rice. So we have this variation in concepts that we need sophisticated linguistic skills and experience to be able to deal with and to document. So this, I think, may turn into another kind of opportunity for translators and other language professionals.
That's very interesting. Yes. Thank you for this hope you're giving us. And I think it will help a lot of people to hear what you say, because there's a lot of, nowadays we have a problem with post-edition. You have heard about that, post-edition.
Post-editing, yes.
Post-editing, sorry. And many translators refuse to make post-edit text because for the problems you have just talked to us. And they don't want. They have to most of them take the post-editing and they make the translation from scratch, and they are paid less than because it's post-edited. So I hope they will hear what you said, that they will understand what is the chemin we have to take,
the path
where we have to go, the path where we have to go. Thank you very much. And so we can follow you on LinkedIn. I give yes. And you said you publish an article, a post every week on various topics. Okay.
I try, mostly related to knowledge graph, or increasingly people have been asking me questions like yours about how will AI impact language professionals. So I've had a few posts about that, and more are coming. Much of the time I spend is trying to develop and educate people about the notion of knowledge graph, because I see so much value in it and see it as useful for solving a range of problems in AI and creating new opportunities for language professionals.
Do you give courses on or webinars on knowledge graphs so that we can learn more about knowledge graphs?
That sounds like an interesting idea. It's something I should think about.
You're interested in?
Okay. Of course. So I have posted some for, let me see, almost all the presentations I've given this year, I posted the slides. So there's a kind of webinar. I think one of them was posted with the audio. So that's kind of like a webinar. But thanks for the suggestion. I'll have to work up, things like courses and that sort of thing.
An exercise so people can make knowledge graphs by themselves in those webinars, for instance.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Mai. And we'll follow you on your LinkedIn page, sure, profile. Thank you very much
Okay.
for...
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. I appreciate the opportunity.
Merci, Lucie, pour l'interprétation. Et puis...
thank you, Lucie, for the interpreting. It's an honor to have an interpreter. I think it's the first time that I've had one.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Donc, l'audio est enregistré. The audio recording is ready.
Okay.
Has Sylvie left us?
It seems she has.
OK. S'il y a des francophones ici qui nous écoutent, l'interprétation vers le français a été enregistrée et sera publiée sur la chaîne YouTube de Translator. So, Mike, it's
Merci
been an
beaucoup,
honor
Lucie.
interpreting you.
That was my pleasure and my honor. Thank you.
I did my best, and the two of you spoke at a perfect speed. So thank you.
Good.
And
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
I'll wish you a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.